And joining us now is Patrick Moore from Green Spirit Strategies. Thanks so much for visiting us at TVO tonight.
Nice to be here, Steve.
I want to start by playing some tape for you. This was a discussion we had at the Munk Center for International Studies about environmentalism, and the issue of nuclear power, yes or no, came up. Let's roll that tape and then we'll come back and talk, okay?
Great.
Michael,
I was wondering about, there's a lot of discussion today about a nuclear renaissance, and we have a famous CANDU reactor system in Canada with a do-pick process, which takes a lot of the fuel rods and reuses them. Now, there's been a lot of discussion about this, very efficient energy.
Elizabeth May, nuclear power doesn't put any smoke in the air. What do you think of that?
Future technology whose time has passed. It's simply way too expensive to do any useful good in addressing the carbon crisis, and it does continue to carry with it the risk of nuclear proliferation, which, although John's right, things are better, we do see the risk of a launch of a new nuclear arms race. We have to pay attention to that.
30 seconds to John, who I'm not sure would like to ban all nuclear power tomorrow.
Don't agree. Do some work for the nuclear industry to declare my biases. Don't agree at all. Never agreed with that position. But I do believe that nuclear is a very viable option. That's why it's taking off all over the world.
Who's closer to right?
The pro-nuclear people are closer to right because the nuclear renaissance is a worldwide phenomenon. Whatever you happen to believe, it is happening. And it's a worldwide phenomenon for two reasons and two overarching policy areas. One is energy security and people not wanting to rely on fossil fuels from unstable political places that may become hostile in the end. And also climate change, which is, you know, these are two really big issues today. And energy security and climate change are directly linked in with the issue of war and peace because oil and gas are directly linked in with war and peace.
Well, speaking of war and peace, you heard Elizabeth May there, the leader of the Greens, say with Iran, with North Korea, this is a kind of technology we cannot risk getting in the wrong hands, so better just not to go there at all. To which you say what?
I say that there's 442 nuclear reactors operating in the world today, 103 in the United States, 22 in Canada. That is simply not going to go away. The most important point is, though, is you don't ban the beneficial uses of a technology just because that same technology can be used for evil. Otherwise, we would never have harnessed fire. What is a car bomb? It's fertilizer, diesel oil, and an automobile mixed up. We're not going to ban those three things anytime soon.
But you would agree they're not as profound a technology as nuclear power is, right? Nuclear power has the ability to do some things to the planet that those things can't.
Well,
Isn't that fair to say?
No, what nuclear power has the ability to do is to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels and our greenhouse gas and air pollution emissions.
I hear you.
Nuclear weapons have a tremendous negative potential, but think about it. Only 2 nuclear weapons have ever been used. And if you look at the last 20 years, over 1 million people have been killed by machetes, and no one has been killed by nuclear weapons. As a matter of fact, in the last 20 years, 4 times as many people have been killed by machetes as were ever killed by nuclear weapons. And nuclear proliferation, even though it has its problems, they are in no way related to peaceful use of nuclear energy. Iran is enriching uranium. That has nothing to do with a nuclear reactor. They're using centrifuge technology and uranium to make a bomb, we think. And it wouldn't matter if we shut down all the nuclear reactors in the world, that technology would still be available.
Okay, how do you get around the issue of nuclear waste?
Well, in the first place, it's not waste. Most people think that when you take the fuel out of a nuclear reactor that it's all been used up, when in fact 90% of the potential energy is still in that used fuel. That's why we don't call it nuclear waste, we call it used nuclear fuel, and through recycling that used nuclear fuel, which Britain and France and Russia have been doing for over 30 years.
Why not us?
We passed a law in Canada, or adopted a policy in Canada. In the United States, they actually passed a law under Jimmy Carter's time to put a moratorium on recycling nuclear waste because of nuclear proliferation. In retrospect, it was a wrong-headed decision. It hasn't even had any effect on nuclear proliferation. What it did was it turned all of this very valuable resource that still remains in the used nuclear fuel into a waste product because it was illegal to recycle it. It would be like saying it's illegal to recycle paper. Suddenly all the waste paper would be waste rather than a valuable resource, which it is.
Is a day coming soon when we in Canada will also recycle 90% of the, what do you want to call it? You don't want to use the term nuclear waste. What do you
Well, there
want to
is
call it?
waste in the used nuclear fuel. It's about 5% of it is waste. But the other 95% of it is fuel that can be used again.
So the 5% is the kind of stuff that stays around for generation after generation after generation. And we have to have, I gather, some sense of security that it's not going to be inappropriately disposed of. So
Actually,
how do we get around to that?
The 5% is the fission products, which are the result of the breakdown of the uranium. And they have far shorter half-lives than the uranium and the plutonium, which is best used again as fuel and not treated as waste, whereas the fission products have half-lives ranging from very, very short up until about 30 years. And so after 300 years, what they do, and they're doing this in France and Japan and Russia and Britain, and they have been doing it for a long time, you put the fission products into glass. It's called vitrification or glassification. You encase that in stainless steel, and you put it in the ground for 300 years, and at the end of that time, it's basically harmless. It's not the hundreds of thousands of years that people talk about all the time. That's got to do with plutonium and uranium.
Okay, but even 300 years, we can't be sure that any of the countries or regulatory organizations that are supposed to be paying attention to this are going to be around in 300 years, right? I mean, would you acknowledge there's some risk here to have to deal with?
No, there isn't really a lot of risk because the fission products are not a bomb material. They're just the waste from the nuclear reaction. You can make
properly stored, it could do what, though?
I don't know what you mean improperly stored. It's put into glass and put in stainless steel canisters. Even if it did come out of the ground, it isn't going to hurt anybody, you know, unless you hold it in your hands. We're not going to do that. The used nuclear fuel and nuclear products have never hurt anybody in this world. You know, we don't have people dying in the streets from nuclear waste, whereas we do have people dying by the thousands from the exhaust from automobiles and power plants that are running on fossil fuels. So, I mean, the fact is the pollution from fossil fuels is the single largest public health problem in the world today, causing more deaths than any other pollutant that we're putting into the environment.
But nuclear doesn't help you on that.
Well, nuclear doesn't have any air pollution, doesn't have any CO2 emissions.
Well, it doesn't once the plant is up and rolling, but the whole the mining of the uranium, the construction of the plant, all of that stuff, I mean, that's pretty harsh on the environment, is it not?
No, it's not particularly harsh. And from a carbon dioxide point of view, there's a lot of exaggeration and misinformation going around on that. It is true that mining uranium and fuel manufacturing and recycling do have some CO2 emissions associated with them, but there's been a large number of full life cycle analyses done on this, and it is very clear nuclear is about 2% of the total CO2 per kilowatt hour of coal, and 2% is like night and day.
Okay, but is there not some reason why we talk about building new nuclear facilities in Ontario today, and that if a shovel not going to go in the ground for 10 years, presumably, because you need 10 years of environmental assessments, I assume you don't do EAs for 10 years if this is a relatively benign process.
Actually, it's not 10 years, it's more like 4 years. And it is reasonable for a large project like a nuclear power station. It's going to take 4 years for planning and then regulatory process and all the rest of it. I mean, that's just the way our system is. It's not because nuclear energy is dangerous that it takes 4 years to get the permit. It's because we've set up a bureaucracy that takes that long, not just for nuclear power, but for a dam project or a mining project or anything.
But all right, but speak, if you would, to the issue that the Ontario experience suggests, which is, and I guess the best example is Darlington, where, you know, this thing started as it was going to cost $1 billion and it was going to be done relatively cheaply and efficiently, and $14 billion later and way over budget and way over time, it was a mess. How do you get around those arguments?
Well, I'm afraid I was partly responsible for Darlington being over budget, because back in those days with the campaigns against nuclear energy, and when I was in Greenpeace then, and Greenpeace was paramount in the campaign against nuclear at the time, that project was stopped and started on 3 different occasions. It took so long to build it. And can you imagine when there's 3,000 people working on a project, how expensive it is to stop it, lay them all off, and then start it back up again? That is the main reason why Darlington went so far over budget, was because of political decisions that were made by various governments to stop its construction and then start it up again.
So were you wrong to have done that?
Yes, I think we were in retrospect incorrect in not making the distinction between the destructive and the beneficial uses of nuclear technology. We started with anti-war. We started with anti-nuclear testing and nuclear weapons. We marched in the peace marches. We were totally focused on preventing nuclear holocaust. And I believe we made the mistake of lumping nuclear energy in with nuclear weapons as all part of the same holocaust, when we should have been discerning enough to recognize that there is a peaceful use for nuclear power, and that now with the climate change issue in the forefront, it's very obvious. I mean, it is in a way a no-brainer. There is no other technology that does as much and can do as much to reduce fossil fuel consumption, and in the final analysis, There is no way that Ontario will ever shut down its coal plants unless it replaces that power with nuclear. Gas is too expensive and too volatile, and in the end is not going to be suitable for baseload power. It already isn't suitable for baseload power.
Wind, solar, conservation, not going to get there?
Conservation and efficiency have a huge role to play and always have had. If you look at the rate of the economic growth in Ontario, and then you look at the rate of energy use, the energy use has grown far, far slower. That is because conservation and efficiency have cut in. And indeed, industry is always leading on efficiency, because any 2 cents you can take down to the bottom line in saving energy and producing a product, industry is going to do that. And people are doing a better job of conservation, and once smart metering comes in, they'll do an even better job. That's one of the best things that is coming along. But in the final analysis, energy needs will grow as the economy continues to grow, and we need to fill that gap. And therefore, I believe that the choices for baseload power are hydroelectric, coal, and nuclear. We don't want coal because of climate change and air pollution.
Right.
Hydro is built to capacity in Ontario to a large extent, and everybody's competing for Quebec's hydro. The whole northeast states are bidding on that, so it's not likely that Ontario can make up its shortfall by buying power from Quebec. Therefore, the choice is nuclear, because wind and solar...
You're there as a sort of a, by process of elimination,
Precisely.
Nuclear. So not because you're all that bullish on the thing, but only because...
because I think nuclear after hydro is the best choice. All energy production has environmental impacts. There's no doubt about that, and has issues associated with it. People don't like hydro dams because they flood valleys. People don't like nuclear plants because they produce waste products. People don't like coal-fired power plants because they pollute the air and put CO2. But when it comes to ranking them, I'd go hydro, nuclear, fossils.
But hydro we're maxed out at already, so you can't go
in
further.
Ontario. So,
okay.
and speaking of wind and solar, they are great, except they have the Achilles heel of being intermittent and unpredictable, or at least unreliable, so they can't be used for baseload power. They can only sort of augment the other energy sources.
Speaking of unpredictable, I wonder if you're going to give me an unpredictable answer to this next question. Do you consider yourself an environmentalist?
Well, absolutely. I've been an environmental activist all my life.
Now, when you were with Greenpeace, sure. But how about now?
I'm an environmentalist. I'm promoting environmental positions and sustainability as the absolute main point in my whole life. I mean, everything we do in Green Spirit Strategies is focused on developing environmental solutions and sustainability solutions that are based on effectively balancing environmental, social, and economic priorities. Environmentalism that is just sort of blinkered and focused entirely on the environment as if the 6.5 billion people don't exist doesn't make any sense to me. We have to put the people in the equation because they are part of the environment too, and every day we need food, energy, and materials to survive. So the challenge is to figure out how to continue getting the food, energy, and materials from the environment, which is the only place we can get it from, while at the same time not undermining the very environment that produces those foods for us and those materials for us. So the challenge is to continue to support civilization, which means continuing to get food, energy, and materials, but at the same time, through changes in our behavior and changes in our technology, reducing our negative environmental impacts, and switching from fossil fuels to hydro and nuclear, for example, is a way to do that in electricity production. Switching from natural gas to ground source heat pumps or geothermal technology is the way to do that in all of our buildings.
I don't have to tell you that your former colleagues with Greenpeace think that you have gone straight to hell, right? You know that?
Yeah, well, you call people names when you can't, think up a constructive argument on the subject. This isn't actually about me or whether I am gone to hell or not. This is about energy, it's about the future of the economy, it's about the future of the society, and it's about the future of the environment. And they are all inextricably linked together, and anybody who doesn't analyze the situation with that in mind is just off on one tangent.
Okay. When the knowledge of your coming to our studio got out there, I got a lot of emails from people who were saying, you got to ask him this, you got to ask him that. So humor me for a second here, okay?
Yes, do ask me those things.
Do you now, or have you ever worked for the nuclear industry?
Of course, I purposefully work for the nuclear industry because I believe it is part of the solution. The way Green Spirit Strategies operates is that we identify industries, sectors, associations that we believe are part of the solution for sustainability in the future. We believe that the only way to shut the coal plants down in Ontario is to build new nuclear, even more than the government is at the present time predicting or assuming. And that to me is just a fact of life. Those coal plants will remain in operation until sufficient nuclear energy or other energy Like, okay, what is it? There isn't the hydro capacity. It has to be baseload. And the sort of dirty little secret of the Ontario Clean Air Alliance is that they are funded by the gas industry. And so the Ontario Clean Air Alliance is actually a front for building more big baseload gas plants like the one that's going on the waterfront in Toronto now. Those produce a huge amount of fossil fuel.
I get press releases from them every other day excoriating the McGuinty government for refusing to shut down the coal-fired generating reactors.
Yes, but they're not battling against the gas plant on the waterfront. They'd rather have gas than nuclear, even though gas produces a vast amount of carbon dioxide.
You've heard this question before, I'm sure, but I'll ask it again anyway. Does the fact that you do business with the nuclear industry and its associations affect your position on this issue?
No, the reason I'm doing business with the nuclear industry is because I support it as part of the solution for the future. And the reason we work with people in agriculture, forestry, fisheries and aquaculture, mining, and energy is we pick companies and associations and sectors that we believe are part of the solution. That's why we support biotechnology, because genetic engineering actually is the solution to malnutrition and micronutrient deficiency in the countries where rice is the main staple.
Okay, so
that is just a fact. And so that's why we support it.
Can you give me your sense then of the so-called environmental movement? Now, we saw this several years ago in Ontario with Pollution Probe, where the head of Pollution Probe, Colin Isaacs, wanted to actually do some consulting with Loblaws in order to get them to put diapers out that were more environmentally sensible. And, you know, he got thrown out of there because they just didn't want him associating with corporate Ontario at all. Is it possible for environmentalism and industry to coexist?
Well, if it's not, we're in a pretty tough spot, aren't we? I mean, it has to exist together. I mean, the fact is, people in industry these days are concerned about the environment. Corporate responsibility is a huge area of interest right now.
They say once you're in bed with it, you're co-opted, and then you cease to be effective anymore. That's what the other side is saying. You know that.
Yeah, well, I don't think they're right, and I think actually they're becoming more ineffective all the time. And what's happening right now is environmentalists around the world are recognizing that nuclear energy is the way to go. Stuart Brand, the founder of the Whole Earth Catalog in California, for nuclear energy and publishing about saying that the environmental movement has to change their mind. Jared Diamond, the author of Guns, Germs, and Steel, for nuclear energy. Tim Flannery, the famous environmentalist from Australia, who is a colleague of David Suzuki's, for nuclear energy. Bruno Combi, the physicist from France, who heads the Environmentalists for Nuclear Energy, 8,000 members, all environmentalists who say they're in favor of that.
Check that monitor out over my shoulder over here. Have we got this website standing by? Have you seen this before?
Yeah, that's like 20 years old.
You seem to encourage a great deal of hostility among people, particularly among the people you used to work with at Greenpeace, who think that you are, or who allege that you are trading off your years with that organization to do what you're doing today.
That's right. They say I'm trading on my history with Greenpeace. Actually, they're the ones who are trading on my history with Greenpeace. I helped found it and lead it for 15 years, and I believe we did a lot of great work. But a certain time came for me when I had to make the transition from confrontation and basically anti-establishment activity to recognizing that now a majority of people agreed with what we were saying. I should sit down with them and try to figure out what the solutions are. And really finding a consensus about which way to move is the important thing now, not to figure out who to bash over the head. Because we need industry. I mean, anybody who uses industry in a pejorative, I just write off pretty well immediately, because industry is what makes everything we use in our lives every day, and industriousness is a good quality. Well, at least I was brought up to think that industriousness was a good quality.
Help us get to the finish line then here. We have, on the one hand, we have environmentalists who want everybody to stop driving. They want us to live in mud huts. They want us to have no electricity and so on. You have the other hand where some people in industry, not everyone, some people in industry are saying, we cannot make any concessions to anything remotely resembling Kyoto or our entire economy will collapse. Where's the consensus to be found?
The consensus is to be found in identifying ways in which we can change our daily lives, and particularly ways in which we can change our technologies. Canada could meet Kyoto 3 times over if it put nuclear plants in the oil sands, if Alberta went nuclear and hydro instead of all coal, if we bought smaller and more sensible cars. The automobile has always been a sort of a symbol of our our personal prestige. Instead of being a practical thing like buying a pair of sensible shoes, we should all be buying sensible cars.
What do you drive?
I drive a smart car for two, made by Mercedes, and I drive a Toyota Highlander hybrid when I have to go to my country home on Vancouver Island, where there's 40 miles of gravel road, and I tow a boat around in the summer.
So your
But
carbon footprint's pretty small.
It is now, because I've changed my house and I've changed my transportation. That's the two things that an individual can do. Like, an individual can't build a nuclear power plant, but an individual can change their home from gas to ground source heat pump, which eliminates fossil fuel from your house, and they can also change their automobile to one that gets better mileage or uses more biofuel or is a hybrid electric vehicle, which is something everybody should be doing. And instead of feeling proud about your car, you know, we should just be practical about our cars and feel proud about the fact that we're reducing our environmental footprint. And if we could get people's psychology changed around like that, it would make a huge difference.
Patrick Moore, we're grateful that you could spare some time and come in and give us your views tonight in TVO. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Steve.